This is chapter 5 of the social art, learning about words and their structure. This is a quote from T.S. Eliot. I gotta use words when I talk to you. Learning to perceive and produce the sounds, phonemes, of a language is one of the fundamental tasks in becoming a fluent speaker, but it is only a means to an end. The sounds themselves are meaningless. Children have to realize that some of the noises made by adults refer to various aspects of the world in which the children find themselves. They have to notice that certain combinations of sounds occur repeatedly and that the adults seem to attach some significance to these combinations. For example, daddy, milk, down, no. At first, the child probably only has the vaguest glimmerings as to the significance these noises have for adults. It is also difficult for an adult to guess at what significance the child attaches to the utterance. One father was pleased that his daughter seemed to understand the question, "Where is the baby?" by turning and looking at herself in the mirror, but she did exactly the same when he asked her, "Where is daddy?" We are back to the problem of the dog and its name. It is not only with children and animals that there is a problem of knowing how much is understood. As adults, we take it for granted that the people we are speaking to understand what we are saying in the way that we intend, and we are dismayed or shocked if we find out they have not. It is, however, very difficult to know whether someone has understood or not. Take a very simple example. Suppose you are in a strange town and you stop and ask someone for directions. Very often, the directions are so complex that you have difficulty in following them. Do you really say, "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Can you tell me again?" Perhaps you always do, but I know that I often simply thank the speaker and move on in the direction I think I have been told to go, hoping that things will become clearer as I go and leaving the direction giver the sense of having been helpful. I suspect that young children are frequently in the situation of not understanding clearly what an adult has said. But by luck or good judgment, they usually succeed in behaving the way we expect, and thus we assume that they understand. As soon as they begin to speak, however, children can test their understanding. For example, by saying milk or some approximation to the sound that the adult interprets as milk, and the adult either responds by saying, "Yes, that's milk," or by giving the child some milk, or acting in some other way that confirms the relationship between the sound and the object. This is where the dog fails. No matter how loudly, repeatedly, or insistently it barks, we will not suddenly recognize its vocal production as walkies or some other word in our language. Parents are often anxious to report their child's first word, but what this means is the first sound that the parents identify as corresponding to a word in the adult language. Very often, parents are so impatient to hear this first word that they decide that a certain babbling sequence is daddy or mummy or nana. However, such sequences do not become words until they are used repeatedly and consistently with the same reference. A word is neither the meaning alone nor the sound alone, but the conventional association of the two. That the sound alone does not constitute the word can be seen in the number of words that have the same sound. For example, right, right, and right, but very different meanings. Words that sound the same but have different meanings are called homophones. The fact that we spell them differently makes it easier to recognize them in writing, but in the spoken language they can be distinguished only by the context in which they occur. Surprisingly, there seldom seems to be a problem in knowing which word is used, except in artificially constructed examples such as "the sun's rays meet," which is indistinguishable from "the sun's rays meet." The example, however, illustrates an important point that cannot be stressed too much. The hearer is not simply a passive receptor for a message transmitted by the speaker. The hearer has to interpret the signal and decide, for example, whether the third word is the verb raise or a noun raise. The words themselves do not always come with clear labels saying "I am a verb" or "I am a noun." In many languages, however, there are parts of words that help to identify the part of speech. In English, for example, the suffix ly often indicates an adverb, quickly, happily, but not always. Friendly, ment, ment, often indicates an abstract noun. enjoyment, and er often occurs with nouns formed from verbs to indicate the person doing the action. Painter, speaker, but not always. Hammer, bigger. These parts of words that have a consistent meaning or function are called morphemes. Morphemes are of various types. Some morphemes are words that cannot be divided up into meaningful parts. For example, dog, father, artichoke, rhinoceros. These are free morphemes because they can occur alone without other morphemes attached to them. Free morphemes are sometimes classified into two categories: content words such as those just illustrated, and function words such as to, the, and because. But the distinction is not always easy to maintain. Morphemes such as the suffix ly, ment, and er, or the prefixes un and dis that must be attached to another morpheme are known as bound morphemes, of which there are two types. Some of these suffixes and prefixes are used to make new words from existing ones. For example, from the verb employ, we can create the nouns employer, employee, and employment. These kinds of bound morphemes are called derivatational morphemes, and languages differ in the ways in which they can create new words in this manner. In English, we often create new words by using Greek or Latin words, as in telephone, from the Greek words for distant and speaking. In German, the corresponding word Fernsprecher was created by using the German words for far and speaker. Children do not have to concern themselves with derivational morphology. It is enough if they can identify a sequence of sounds as a word. This may not seem to be a very difficult task, but as adults we have become accustomed to the notion of words as separate from each other. This is partly because in the written form, words are separated from each other by a space. In speech, there may be no pause between words, and it is only because hearers know where the pauses could occur that they can tell which words are being said. There is no audible difference between an aim and a name in normal speech, but the hearer will usually have no difficulty in deciding which the speaker intended because only one will be appropriate in the context. A problem arises only when the context fails to distinguish between two possibilities. For example, if I say, "I saw Joan Nash yesterday," you might respond, "I don't know Joan Ash. Who is she?" As adults, we are most likely to experience this kind of situation when we are listening to someone speaking a language which we know up to a point but not very well. Other examples in the history of the language show that hearers fail to recognize where a word began. The word apron belongs with napery and napkin, but has lost its initial consonant, whereas nickname, from Middle English ekniname, an additional name, has gained one. However, children seldom make mistakes of this kind, and if they do, they are likely to be corrected. Children also have to notice that words occur in different forms: cat, cats, cats; walk, walks, walking, walked; big, bigger, biggest. The suffixes s, ing, ed, er, and est in these words belong to the category of grammatical morphemes. Note that s is listed 3 times. Just as the free morphemes, or words, there can be homophones in bound morphemes. The s of the plural in cats is different from the s in he walks, which marks the subject of the verb in third person, singular, and also different from the possessive s of the cat's eyes. Similarly, the er of bigger is not the same as the er of singer. Languages vary as much in their morphology as in their phonology. In many languages, there is grammatical gender, that is, every noun belongs to a formal class that affects the form of other words accompanying it. In Spanish, for example, masculine nouns often end in o and feminine nouns in a. The articles and adjectives accompanying the noun must agree with it in number and gender, so that in Spanish we have los hermanos buenos, the good brothers; las hermanas buenas, the good sisters. Here the O signals masculine gender and the A feminine gender, and the S signals plural not only on the nouns but also in the articles and the adjectives. It is not only people or animals that have gender in Spanish, but all nouns, so that we have los libros buenos, the good books, las mesas buenas, the good tables. Such languages, such as German, have three genders: masculine, feminine, and neuter, and English speakers are sometimes surprised to find that das Mädchen, the girl, is neuter. Gender systems are not simply ways of indicating sex, however, but part of a grammatical system of marking which words are to be associated together. This can be seen very clearly, for example, in Swahili, which has 7 noun classes. Gender systems and grammatical morphology in general are one of the most intriguing aspects of linguistic structure. Some languages have very complex morphology, which can be very difficult for adult learners to master. Languages that are easier for adults to learn, particularly Pidgins and Creoles, have little to no grammatical morphology. Children do not find the task impossible, but progress gradually through different stages of acquisition. The age at which children pass through these stages varies from child to child, but the order tends to remain more or less the same. Children usually learn the morphemes that have a fairly clear meaning, for example, the plural s, before those which significance is less obvious, for example, the third person singular s on present tense verbs. Children also learn those aspects of language that are straightforward and regular before those that are complex and irregular. In fact, this concern for regularity often leads children to make mistakes at a certain age in their language development because they have not learned that there are irregularities in the adult language. For example, children learning English will often go through a stage when they say comed and goed, even though earlier they may have used the forms came and went correctly. The explanation for this apparent regression is that the child has learned the rule of forming the past tense of verbs such as played and walked, and applies the same rule to all verbs, including the so-called irregular verbs, which are a residue of an earlier stage of the language. Mistakes of this kind are very helpful for understanding the process of language development, but they show that children are not simply imitating what they hear, but working out a system for speaking.